Hello, DFT10 students. Today we are starting Unit 5 and we're going to be looking at dimensioning. Dimensioning is something that you have seen throughout the entire course, you just haven't created the dimensions yourself. Any one of the drawings that we've used or looked at has had dimension lines giving us measurements of all of the important features of any given object, and they are required for whoever is taking your blueprints to create the part or building or whatever it is that's being constructed. There's a bit of a art and science that goes with dimensioning. There are some hard and fast rules that we've got to abide by, but in general what you want to do is you want to give the viewer enough information to construct every part and every feature of the part without giving too much information, too many measurements, or repeating measurements in multiple views. And aside from the hard and fast rules, there is a bit of an art to it in that you want to space and lay out your dimensions in a way that is visually pleasing and not cluttered. So you do have to play around with them a little bit. There's different types of dimensions, and we'll go through what those are. There is on the website, there is an entire section dedicated to drafting dimension. And if I go here to our dimensioning unit, we're just going to go through the basics of what is dimensioning, and then I'll show you how to apply that to a couple of orthographic drawings, which is what we will be dimensioning. And you'll have experience creating the three view. You'll have the experience of creating 3-view orthographics already from our Unit 3. So this is just basically adding some information on top of that. Okay, so let's get right to it. What is dimensioning? Okay, so dimensioning is the act of creating measurements and placing them on your drawing in a way that it gives the viewer enough information to build the part and all the unique features. There are dimensioning guidelines inside of our digital textbook, and I'm just going to roll down to where they are. Here we go, the basics of dimensioning, and there is additional information on the website too. In fact, I've got a separate PDF file that shows you a bit more detail. Okay, so this is going to include not only the words and the leaders, that's what these lines with arrows are, they're leaders, but also the line thicknesses recommended and whatnot. And we let AutoCAD take care of most of that, but we've already seen certainly all of these line types, hidden lines. We know they should be dashed, and center marks and center lines. We know that they have a different convention for the line type. They've got a long dash, short dash, long dash. So we've seen all these. We've seen the cross hatching, but there is going to be some additional information on recommended line thicknesses for those particular features. But if you just go by what I've done in the examples so far, you should be fine. The one that you may not have seen is something called a phantom line, and I don't have an example of it here, and we're probably not going to have to worry about it. So here's the type of lines we've seen. The visible lines are the nice bold white lines that we use for our object line. That's the 0 layer. Our cutting plane lines, and when we were doing our sectionals, we were indicating where in a drawing the cut was occurring. So for instance, for an aligned sectional, our cutting plane would have been through the middle to the center of the object and then out through one of the legs. And we had those lines a lot thicker than others, just to indicate that they were indeed cutting plane lines and not object lines. So you do have some experience with those already. Our hidden lines, again, they're generally thinner and they're dashed. I like to put them in a different color. You can have thick hidden lines. Usually they're not necessary. We've discussed the center lines, generally, again, like hidden lines, thinner, just with a different dash sequence. Phantom lines, don't worry about. And then we've got our dimension lines or extension lines, which are also going to be thin, and generally I put them on the 0 layer, on the object layer, so they're usually the same color and thickness as whatever's on that layer. Another one you might not have seen is a break line. A break line, it just indicates that you're taking a certain section of the object and creating a different view somewhere else to give you an indication of an interior feature or something that isn't easily seen on one of these orthographic views, one of the 90 degree views, whether it be front, top, or end view. So sometimes you'll see, it looks very much like a cut line. It's about the same thickness and whatnot, but you'll have this break line here, and then you will also see after that break line, it'll send you kind of somewhere else in the drawing to give you a bit more information on that particular piece. So you're not going to see those too often in this class. It's more for more complex drawings and objects, but just so that you're aware that that does exist. Okay, now this just kind of reviews those lines and tells you what they're for and gives you the relative thicknesses. But we know what these are for because we've used them. We've used them all. So let's actually just get to dimensioning an object, and I'll show you some of the sort of hard and fast rules, and also some of the tips and tricks on the art side of it to make it more pleasing for the user and also give them enough information. So if we're looking at a 3-view orthographic, and this is a view that you've certainly seen before, this is the base plate. What you'd like to do is you'd like to kind of space out your dimensions so that you use all 3 views to give the viewer information. That allows you to space things out, keep things less cluttered. And it's also common that you will not have every single dimension on every single view. Again, it gets complicated. You want to include enough information for the viewer to have all of the required measurements, but again, you don't want to include too much and clutter the drawing. So let's just start with the front view. That's normally where I start. And you've got things on the front view that are like the entire length of the object, very important linear measurements. There are no curves or circles in this particular drawing, and we'll go through those in a different drawing that has more circular features. Okay, so when you're doing your dimension, typically in the O layer, and then down here in your tools, it's called annotate. With the full version of AutoCAD, there's a lot more flexibility to change line types and the types of dimensions and things like that. It's quite simplified in this AutoCAD web app, but that's okay for our purposes. So we're going to primarily be using this dimension tool. We're going to be using the text, the M-text, and we're also going to be using these leaders. Okay, so now this dimension tool over here helps you with not just linear measurements, but also you can use it to demonstrate radius and diameter, which we won't need for this particular one. So let's just get started here. We're going to grab a dimension, and we're going to just go on the front view. We're going to go all the way from this side to that side to get the entire length, and I'm going to bring it down. My length drawing here indicates 103 units. The default setting, it appears, for linear measurements or linear dimensioning, has the number above the line. Generally speaking, a preference would be to have that 103 inside the line. But again, that is a feature that you'll probably see on a full version of AutoCAD, not the desktop app, or sorry, the web app. There are some different types of dimensioning that you can access from the command menu. So if you were to just type in dim for a dimension, you'll see that there's dim aligned, there's dim linear, and there's dim post. These two we will use more often than the others. We've done the linear already, and then aligned just takes the angle of the line and writes the number on an angle. So for instance, if I were to do some sort of measurement across there, if that was necessary, you'll notice that the number is on an angle. Generally, we want to avoid that. We want to have all of our measurements to be viewed horizontally from left to right. So we're not going to use that one so much, but I did want to make you aware that of its existence. All right, so let's get back to we'll get back to that dimension there. So we had 103, and I'm going to bring it down a little further than I normally would. And the reason I'm going to do that is because you include measurements from other features, and you always have your biggest dimension to the farthest outside, and anything that's smaller you include between it and the actual object. So you want to have enough space in your dimensioning that obviously the numbers aren't being cut off. You generally do not want to dimension your object inside the object. You'd like your measurements outside. And anything that is lined up, or what's called a continuous dimension, you want to try to line up the arrowheads. And it's a bit tricky on this program. I haven't really found a way for it to do it automatically, but there is actually a continuous dimension tool inside the real version where you indicate that this is going to be a continuous, and then it'll allow you to do the first one and the second one, third one, however many you have, and it lines them up automatically. But we're going to have to do that manually. So this is a good place to note this 18 measurement, but in our drawing for this object, and it is, I should remember where it is in the textbook here. These are all objects from our digital text. Just go up there till I find it. So the scrolling isn't giving anyone a headache. There it is, right there. It's the jig spacer. You notice that we don't have a horizontal measurement on the example that they've given us. And when we're practicing these, it's perfectly okay for you to go to the drawing itself and see how they've dimensioned it and try to replicate that. But there's also going to be an object I'm going to give you that isn't from the textbook that you're going to have to dimension all by yourself. So you're not going to have this sort of guideline. But you notice for this little cutout chunk here, they don't give us a measurement of 18. We know it's 18 because we measured it on our own drawing, but they don't give you an actual linear measurement here. They give you an angle. So we're going to actually stick to that for this particular piece, which means we need to indicate this angle somewhere. On our version, that angle can't be seen on the front view. It can only be seen on the top view. So that's a measurement or a dimension that's going to need to occur on the top view. And because that's the case, I actually don't need this dimension to be that far away. So I can bring it in because I don't need anything on the inside. Another option for us would have been to, and this might be a better way to do it, is to bring it up to the top. And I'll just redo it so that it doesn't run all the way through my object. You don't want to have dimension lines running through your object. So I could put this dimension up here and then do the aligned dimensions that I was referring to on the top side, because we do have these linear measurements. You'll notice that we do have these linear measurements in the textbook version, so it's perfectly acceptable for us to include those right here, and I'll show you how we would line them up. So this is one thing I actually don't like about the AutoCAD web apps dimensioning tool, is that it defaults decimals to commas. And you can change that, and I'll show you how, but for some reason it's commas, which is used more in Europe than it is in North America. But there is a way to kind of manually change that, and I'll show you how, because I'm just not a fan of having the commas. So this particular measurement here is 28.5. I'm going to include it, and I'm just going to try and space it about evenly between the top dimension and object. So we've got the entire length of the object here, and we've got the length of this particular chunk there. And now what I can do is I can line it up by touching on that arrow and then going down here, even though I'm on an angle, because after I click there, oh, I'm on the wrong dimension type here. At least I thought I could do that. Maybe I can't. See, that's inconvenient, because if I go down there, oh no, I can't, sorry, I just did, you don't click down there, my mistake. So just to reiterate that, I accidentally clicked. Here I want to click because I want it to be lined up with this arrow, then I just drag it out, and then I go down to here, which is where it's going to end, but I don't want that measurement to be 46.34, I don't want it to be on the angle, so I'm just using this point right here just to help me line it up, and it'll snap to the right spot once you get horizontal. I'm just going to use that as a guide, and that's going to be 46. So when I click that, of course I just missed, just click that right there. So that dimension is 46. You'll notice it's lined up, those arrowheads are lined up, and we get to the end of the dimension right there. Okay, now generally this line, you would want that down here, but there's only so much you can do with the web app. What you can do if you really want to get technical with it is you can use the explode feature, and what it does is it takes the dimension, which includes the number, it includes the line, the arrowheads, and these extension lines is what they're called. You notice there's a little break between the extension line and the object line. That's just to make sure that the viewer knows that this is not actually an object line. It's just helping us show you where that particular edge is. Now, I said you can kind of physically manipulate these if you want by exploding them. So if I select my 46 dimension there, and I go to my modify menu and the little explode tool here, that should blow it up, so now I can access everything individually. So I can get the arrowheads, I can get this line, I can get the dimension. Okay, so I'm going to actually blow up this 28.5 dimension here, so I can grab this extension line, and then I'm going to copy that over to the other side, just so I have a matching extension line here for the 46. Now this is a little bit strange. This is one of those rules in dimensioning that often gets overlooked, and that is it's very typical for you not to include this dimension here. The reason being you have the entire length of the object and you have the length of these two particular chunks, which means with simple mathematics you can figure out what that's supposed to be. And the thinking is just as many dimensions as you can leave out of your drawing while still giving enough information, that's the goal. So it's okay to leave one of these dimensions out as long as you have the other ones that will help you do the simple math to figure out what that one is. To get rid of the decimal here, if you double click on the dimension, it will show you the text version of it, and you can just go in for that comma and put a period instead, and that's what I always do. I just don't like the commas. Now for our drawings, we're just going to stick to 1 decimal place for these larger objects. And if we have smaller objects where there's more decimal places will help make the drawing clearer, then we could include we could change our precision for our annotations or for our dimensioning, and that's just up in the settings menu in units, I believe. There you go, decimal. We've got 1 decimal place, and then for our angles we've got decimal degrees, and then we've got actually 0 decimal places for our decimal degree angles. Most of our angles aren't going to have a decimal. It's going to be 45 degrees or 30 degrees or something like that. So typically, I leave that one at no decimal places unless I absolutely need it. Okay, so we've got a couple of the features dimensioned here. If you feel that these lines look too close or too similar to your object lines, it's perfectly acceptable to take your dimensions and to put them in a slightly different color. If you feel like that'll help you. So if I, maybe Con 3, I'm not using that light blue color for anything else in my drawing, it would be certainly acceptable for me to go up here and to dimension everything in that light blue layer. I can't remember what color it was. Was it 5, 4, 3, 3? Okay, so maybe just for clarity's sake, I'll keep my dimensions in blue for this particular drawing. And again, it's acceptable to do this. It's also acceptable to use the object lines as long as you follow the rules. So I've got this gap measured, or this sunk section, this gap, I can figure that out. I've got the entire length of the object. These were going to come from the top view because of this angled feature. So you just got to look at what else is it that that the user is going to need information on. So I get rid of that piece at the bottom there. I'm not sure why that's still in there. And I've noticed sometimes the erase tool doesn't work very well, the delete key. Usually just have to refresh your browser, but you can also use the erase tool in the menu, and that one always works. All right, so what else do I need to know? I need to know the height of this object, and I could do it here, or I could do it on the end view. There seems to be lots of room for drawing within my, my title block drawing space, so it's okay for us to measure that here on the front view. But again, we could put it on the end view if we thought that was necessary. I'm just going to put it on. This isn't a very complicated object, so there aren't a whole lot of tricky measurements for it. So it's not going to be particularly cluttered if I put it right here. And the other thing I can do here is I can also give you the height of this little chunk right there in the same manner that I did up here. So like if I bring the 52.5 out a little bit further, just kind of eyeballing it so it's about the same as the 103 up here. We notice that it's 52.5. We notice that it is vertically oriented, which again is not really the preference, but it's just the way that the AutoCAD web version is set up, and there isn't a whole lot you can do about that. So if we go to that 52.5, okay, and remember we got to explode the object if we want to change things manually. So we'll explode that dimension, double click on the text, and then we can change that comma to a decimal. All right, so let's continue our dimensioning. Now we could either dimension the chunk from here to here, or we can dimension the chunk from here to here. It doesn't really matter. I'll go from the bottom up on this one. So we know that that is 18, and I'll put it kind of right in the middle. Once again, we can omit one linear dimension because we can figure out what this is, this chunk between there and this step, quite easily given that we have the other two measurements. This drawing's not particularly cluttered, so you could include that dimension and it probably wouldn't cause too much difficulty. But it is, but if you want to stick to the strict rules of dimensioning, it would be typical that you would omit that one measurement. All right, let's move to the top view and see if there's anything we haven't dimensioned. We know the length of this piece and the entire length of the object from our front view, so we don't want to replicate any of those. What we can't tell from the front view is the measurement from here to here. So there's a measurement right there that we're going to want to include in our top view because it isn't included anywhere else. And then also the distance to here. So if we do the larger distance first, bring that out a little bit, you could even line it up with this one right there. And then we'll do this measurement here, about halfway again. That takes care of those two measurements that we couldn't see on the front view. And then remember, we've got this angular feature here. Now, we don't want to measure the angular feature in a linear fashion because, look, it's 25.46. It's not very nice numbers. So we're going to indicate that with an angle. And if the viewer has the angle, they can draw it in the top view, and then they can bring it down to figure out where this line. So that's why we're not dimensioning it down here. We're going to use an angular dimension on this top one. In order to do angular dimensions, you just click the same dimension tool, and then you try and get it so you got that little box. You click on the line, the first line, and then you click on the second line that you want to have your angle with. Okay, so you see that's a 45-degree angle there. You could also include it as a 135-degree angle if you want to go inside the object. Generally, you want to go outside the object, so you've got all sorts of options here, right? You can go on 135 there, 135 there, 45 there, or 45 here. I think 45 here makes the most sense, and I'm just going to put it a little bit closer to the object so that we don't clutter up these other dimensions. All right, so always just keep checking your object and looking at, do I have everything measured? Do I have all my vertical heights? I've got that, I've got that. I've got this angle. This measurement from the back of the object all the way to the front of the object, we don't see that anywhere else in any of our views. Now we could do that on our top version by just going here and then there. Don't click here, just use it as to line you up, right? And then click there. So we could put that dimension on the top view for 55. You could also put it on our end view because it'll be the same measurement right there. There's nothing else on the bottom of this object right now, so putting that dimension line down there might make it look a little bit cluttered. We could also do it over here, include a couple of staggered dimensions if we wanted to. We have the 37, we have the 21. We could add another one. We could add the 55 to this side and keep those internal measurements. That again, that's part of the art. It's not really a hard and fast rule on that. If I feel like it maybe clutters the object a little less to put it on this side, that might be the preferred option. So I'm just going to line this up, make sure I get snapped, and then I'll bring it over. So there's 55 there. So now we have this measurement from this is essentially the back of the object, the front of the object in the top view. So we've got that measurement, and then we look over here. We've got one hidden line because on the end view you can't see this middle slot. So we have one hidden line. Here's another hard and fast rule. We do not dimension hidden lines. So don't dimension hidden lines. You have that measurement in another place anyway because we note that the height of this particular gap is nowhere yet. So we do need to include the height of that gap. And the only place we can do the height of the gap is in this view because it's a hidden line over here and we do not want to dimension a hidden line. So that is one dimension that we need to have. I don't want to drag it through the object out to this side, so this is one that I'm going to put in this blank space right here. Okay, so if I grab my dimension tool and I just click on, you can just click on the line or you can click on one point and then another point. Both will work the same way. So I'll put that 22 right there. Now here's another instance of something that you're going to want to change. You never want to have your extension lines or your dimension lines running inside of an object line. And it does it automatically, so that blue line is actually on my object line for the drawing, and I don't want that. So that's another case where you would select your dimension, and then you'd blow it up with the explode button. Okay? And now I'm just going to select this chunk of the dimension and delete that so that it does not appear over top of my object line. Excuse me. This one's fine because this is a gap. So this one's fine, we just don't want that one down there. And we've got our measurement here, it's all fine. And I just want to check something with the dim menu on this. If the dim aligned will continue to make the numbers vertically oriented. Yeah, that's vertically oriented. Dim linear is also vertically oriented. You see the 22 straight up and down. So that's something I generally like to avoid if I'm using the real version of AutoCAD. I generally like to have those numbers horizontal. It's easier to read. And I feel like there should be a setting in here somewhere to change that, but again, it's not quite as intuitive as the real version. Maybe if I go to ISO standard, I'm just going to check something really quickly here on the fly. Okay, if I have just in my layers property, see here, annotative text style, standard. We'll just see what happens here. Sometimes this messes with the size of the object. So I'm just going to quick check to see. Okay, it looks like it's vertically oriented, but if I play with the dim style a bit, and I go to ISO, didn't change anything. Standard makes it really small. That's why I avoid standard. So inside of your AutoCAD, the real version, you'd have many different types of dimensioning, and you'd be able to adjust this so that any of the vertical measurements had horizontal numbers. And I just checked the text there, but if I check the entire dim style, no, I did that. I did check the entire dim style. So I don't think there's a way to adjust that. It's just one of those things they stripped out of this version to make it a little bit easier to use, not so many options. So that's kind of the best we can do. Just keep in mind if you are working with a different program that allows you to horizontally integrate these numbers and put them inside of the dimension line, it'll do it automatically. But that's generally the way I like to dimension. I think it's easier to read if the number is inside the line. Now, the line doesn't go through the number. It just kind of stops short of the number. Then you got the number in the middle, and then the line picks up again. I think that's easier to read. You're less likely to confuse that 103 with the dimension. But we work with what we've got here. All right, so we have all the measurements we need. I think we don't have to dimension anything on this end view. It doesn't look like anything here is too cluttered. I don't know that there's anything that we can transfer that's going to make it a whole lot clearer. If you're dimensioning a certain side of the object, you typically don't want to include one dimension here and then other dimensions in a different view. You'd like to have them all in one place. Just makes it a little easier to read and build. So I'm just going to do a double check here and make sure I've got everything dimensioned that I need dimensioned. This measurement from this part all the way to here, I don't have that, but that can be figured out pretty easily using the 55, the 37, and the 21. This 55 could have gone over here, okay, to kind of keep it more in line with the other ones. But again, I said that's one that this is the part that's sort of the art and not the science. Does that get too cluttered when I go sort of 3 layers out? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. I say it's not a big deal, but I'll just put it over here, just maybe reduce our clutter a little bit. Sorry, and you can move that 55 just by clicking on it and dragging it where you want. Generally, you want it right in the middle of your line. It puts it there by default, but again, you can manually adjust these things if you need to. So I think that one's effectively dimensioned. I don't think there's anything that's missing. The user can find all of these points from that angle, and there's no boreholes or anything circular. So that is about all you can do for dimensioning on this object, and that's a good thing because you don't need to include more dimensions than is absolutely necessary. We don't have anything on our end view. You notice this length right here is that length right there. So you got to kind of double check at the end, make sure you didn't accidentally include more than you needed to. This measurement here is 55. You've got that right there. And generally speaking, between these two, you can get most of the dimensions out of the way. And if you find it's a bit cluttered, you can bring some of them over to the end view. Just make sure you're not dimensioning hidden lines, unless there's a very specific reason